After 6 months of owning and shooting on the Panasonic S5 Mark II, I want to show you guys what 3 lenses I've been using the most and what piece of information most people are overlooking when buying them. And finally, let's have a conversation about this guy. Before we get into this video, I just want to get one thing out of the way. For someone who thought it was part of the manual focus master race with my cine lenses and thought full frame was just a hype, I absolutely love the Panasonic S5 Mark II. It is nothing but a joy to shoot on. It makes me want to just grab it and create. I love it for content creation and also use it on client work. It's something that I never expected to do. I can easily recommend this camera to anyone I meet for video use, as I've always thought Lumix are really good at providing video features. I'm also thinking of doing a long-term review, so let me know if you want that or if anyone would like to see that. The AF by itself could just be a whole video, I feel, as it's got some really interesting quirks and I've discovered some cool ways to work around that. I don't want to make this video too long, so let's get into lenses, and I'm going to start with my third most used lens. The Panasonic 50mm f1.4 S Pro lens. Now, I don't have it in my hands because, you guessed it, I'm shooting on it right now. Normally, I like to shoot most of my A-roll really wide. For this video, I've switched it up and shot on the 50mm just to show you guys how amazingly sharp this lens is. I do have a Nisi mist filter on it, what's just blooming the lights behind me, but this lens is incredibly sharp, incredibly good at autofocus. The separation is just really good. I would say there's around the meter between me and the camera right now, and as you can see, it's doing a really good job of just blurring that background out. And I guess this is what people describe as the full frame look. So for each lens, I'm going to do a pros and I'm going to do a cons. So let's get into the pros for the 50mm S Pro. This lens is just all about results. It's not a small lens by any means, especially for a 50mm. Build quality is exceptional, just as you'd imagine. It's splash and dust resistant. It's got the aperture ring on the camera, what is always amazing for us video people. It's not declicked, what's a shame, but we'll still take it, as most other lenses in the mirrorless world don't have an aperture ring on the lens at all. This is easily the best 50mm I've ever used when it comes to photography lenses. The use case for me for this lens is when I'm trying to get the maximum kind of cinematic image out of the camera. If I'm shooting B-roll, like a music video, something I want plenty of depth in, this is my go-to lens, what I will shoot most of the time on. I want to talk about price with this lens, as it could be a pro or a con. Kind of sits in the middle. Originally, when this lens was released, it was around $2,000+, what for me is too expensive for this lens. Since then, it has taken a major price cut. I picked up this lens off Amazon on like a deal. I got it for around 1,000 English pounds, what is around 1,250 American dollars. There is the Sigma 50mm 1.4 art lens. That is another extremely good lens. I personally used to own this lens and I loved it. That is around 15 to 20% cheaper than this Panasonic 50mm. If all your budget can afford is the Sigma 50mm art lens, then I would definitely get that lens. I can recommend that lens easy. But if you can stretch that extra 15-20% in your budget, this is the lens I would go for, as it's just exceptionally sharp and clear. So moving into the cons, definitely it's size and weight. In terms of 50mm, and the nifty 50 worlds when it comes to photography lenses, they're normally really small. This one is not that bigger than most 24 to 70s. You're coming in at just a little bit smaller than most 70 to 200s. And regarding its weight, it's not a light lens either for a 50mm. This lens, again, is just all about results. It's not a convenient lens, it's not a do-it-all lens. It does one job, and that is to aim to get you the best results possible out of your Lumix camera. Let's get into my second most used lens. Now this lens is the Sigma Art 24 to 70 f2.8. I don't need to sit here and explain to people what a 24-70 does. It's kind of your do-it-all lens. In just a second, when I show you my most used lens, you'll see why I made a mistake in thinking this was going to be my do-it-all lens. Let's get into the pros and cons, starting with the pros. The first pro is definitely f2.8, consistent all the way through. 2.8 full frame is more than you'll ever need. I once read that the most used f-stop in cinema, in big Hollywood movies, is like f2.8 on a Super 35 sensor. So correct me if I'm wrong, but would that not be like f4 when it comes to full frame shooting? It's really affordable. If you can package this up with the S5ii or the S5iix, you're onto a real winner. The custom button right here, it comes as autofocus lock, what I leave it as. It's also got a locking switch just here. Build quality is really good. The locking switch is great. I mean, I don't use it that much, but if you're traveling, it's always good to flick it on to stop the lens from zooming in and out. As taking me on to the negatives, and probably the biggest con about this lens is the way it protrudes when zoomed. It almost doubles in size. When you're on a tripod, it's not really that much of a big deal, I guess. But when you're handheld with a Lumix, what is really usable with its incredible IBIS, and you zoom out, it kind of throws the balance off. I would say this lens is already a little heavy when it comes to the balance with the S5 Mark II. So when you're fully zoomed out at 70mm, it's just really unbalanced and front heavy. Another negative is I would love this lens to have image stabilization, just to get that amazing Lumix in-body image stabilization paired with the lens, and you get that double IBIS. I would say if Sigma do make a Mark II of this and just add IBIS, that would probably be one of the perfect lenses you could get for this camera. Panasonic Lumix 16-35 S Pro f4 lens. Now when I got this lens, I was planning on using it for maybe content creation, when I needed that ultra wide angle and maybe gimbal work. There was something I massively overlooked from coming from my Blackmagic cameras and Super 35 cameras and stuff like that. What I did not consider was when you move into 60 frames per second, 50 frames per second 4K, there is a 1.5 times crop. So when you hear 16 to 35mm, that's definitely on the wide angle when you're shooting 25 and 24 frames per second. But when you jump into 60 frames per second, because you want some slow motion B-roll, it's only then that this lens becomes a 24 to 50. Now that then means that you can shoot B-roll at 24mm, 35mm and 50mm. So let's say you're on the Sigma 24 to 70 lens, and let's say you suddenly need to capture some 50 frames per second or 60 frames per second B-roll. Now, this 24 to 70 suddenly becomes a 35 to 110mm, roughly equivalent. You've then lost the ability to shoot 24mm. Now in a run and gun situation, this can kind of be important, especially if you're shooting in tight, small spaces. What really makes this lens stay on my camera a lot more than this one in fast-paced scenarios. That said, this one is 2.8 and this one is an f4. So if you can use this lens, I believe you would probably get better results. Let's jump into pros and cons and find out why I guess this is my most used lens. Starting off with build quality, this is the best build quality I think I own in any lens. It is dust, splash and cold proof, what means it can go to really extremely cold places, I think. One thing I want to mention before moving on with build quality is there's a weird rattle inside the lens. Hopefully you can hear that on my lav mic, but I'm not sure what it is. There is no image stabilization in this lens. So, for example, if I grab the Sigma 24 to 70 again and just do the same thing, nothing. So, not sure what that is. It's just something I picked up on, and hopefully it does not make any kind of long-term issues. Something that is massive with this lens, and the reason I chose it over the Sigma that we'll get into in a sec, is the 77mm filter thread. When it comes to video work, we need ND filters. With now full frame sensors and low apertures, you just can't shoot outdoors without ND filters. So this being a 16mm full frame zoom lens and still having a flat front element that allows you to get on that 77mm ND or mist filter is just essential when it comes to videography and cinematography. Another super underrated thing about this lens that just doesn't show up on spec sheets is the balance. This lens is the ideal weight and size for the S5 Mark II. It allows me to get the most stablest handheld shots. Not only is it wide angle what helps, but the balance itself, the way it rests in the hand using the IBIS or the Lumix. Let's get into some cons and negatives of this lens. But I would say the biggest negative is f4. I would adore this lens to be 2.8. Sigma do make a 16 to 28mm f2.8, but that is in their contemporary line of lenses, what means it's aimed more at like beginners or prosumers. So then there is the 14 to 24mm f2.8 Sigma art lens. I would definitely own that lens instead of this one, with it being f2.8, but there is one massive deal breaker. The front element of that lens protrudes, allowing it to have no filters. That means no ND filters, no mist filters. I think it may be one of those lenses where at the back element you can slide in a filter, but that means buying Sigma made ND filters or like third-party ones that are the right size. And I'm pretty sure that that lens is solely made for photography. This is the Sigma MC21. Now what this does is it allows you to get Canon EF glass onto your L-mount cameras. I'm sure you, just like me, have probably seen those videos online that say that autofocus works through this adapter, giving you autofocus on the Lumix cameras using EF glass. Now this is true, kind of. I just want to start out by saying that I've never been a big fan of using adapters. My first experience with Metabones was like on the original old Blackmagic cameras, and then I think I used one on my Sony A7 Mark I. But those Metabones were just full of bugs. They were constantly glitch. The amount of times I've been on a client shoot and the f-stop wouldn't show up, and I was taking it on, putting it off, blowing dust off it, trying over and over again, till eventually the f-stop would show up to shoot for a couple of hours for it to do it all over again. That said, when I tested out the Sigma adapter, it seems to work a lot better. I've never had any problems with it yet. I've not used it a crazy amount, and I've not used it on any paid work yet. I've just literally tested it in and around the office. I was just about to purchase a Panasonic 7-200 f2.8, but just before I made that purchase, I thought, why not buy the Sigma adapter and give my old trusty Canon EF 70-200 f2.8 a go. To cut a long story short, it definitely does not work as good as the L-mount native stuff, but it does work. It works better when it finds a face and an eye. The trouble I seem to have with it is when you're just, say, tapping two objects that don't have a face or it can't find a human. It then kind of sometimes works, sometimes doesn't. And you will see as soon as it detects my eye, it tracks really well. It's slower, it's noisier. This is the Mark II, not the Mark III, so this lens is extremely old at this point. It's kind of cool to see these old lenses working with autofocus with these modern day cameras. Another interesting lens to use with the adapter is the Sigma R18-35. Now I know this is not a full frame lens, but as we just mentioned before, for something to capture B-roll in for your 60 frames per second, having a constant 1.8 aperture, this lens literally becomes a 24 to 50 millimeter when it's in the 1.5 times crop. And to buy this adapter with this lens is probably cheaper than buying most mirrorless lenses anyway. If I had to kind of sum up or recommend my thoughts on using this adapter, it would be, if you want a lens that's going to be your main workhorse and spend most of its time on your camera, I would not use an adapted lens. I would just save up, invest in an L-mount native lens, as it just works better, faster, and feels more modern. If it's going to be kind of a specialist lens or something that you are just going to chuck on now and then, this is definitely a great option. We all know that there is some incredible quality glass out there in the EF range. It just seems to be getting cheaper and cheaper. Now everyone's jumping to mirrorless, so there's some real bargains to be had when purchasing the older EF glass. I have loads more videos coming with the Lumix cameras, so please subscribe below. And if you want to find out how I grade my vlog footage, click here.